Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. Welcome to the United Nations. My name is Jatma Vikramanayake, and I am the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, and I'm honored to kickstart this very important gathering today. Climate change is happening rapidly, dangerously at a pace, leaving us, the 1.8 billion young people around the world, highly vulnerable and inheritors of one of the largest challenges ever to face our world. Although young people today are faced with a future that is threatened by the impacts of climate change, our generation also presents an extraordinary opportunity for urgent action. Climate change mitigation and adaptation is something that the United Nations cannot do alone. We will not achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, nor our goals of ending hunger and poverty and achieving sustainable development goals if we don't put young people first. The good news is that young people all over the world are not passively waiting for the United Nations or for their governments or big companies to reverse climate change. They are tackling climate change head-on by switching to renewable energy, practicing sustainable consumption, changing lifestyles, and engaging with their communities to develop local solutions. Majority of us care about what we eat, what we wear, how we go to school and work, and we're trying our best to make responsible choices. From the 19-year-old Karan Jerath, who invented the groundbreaking subsea wellhead capping device that contains oil spills at the source, to 27-year-old Eda Hamar, working on sustainable and ethical fashion, to the students who were the first responders during the recent floods in Kerala, to the hundreds of young people who came out for the climate marches all over the world, young people are leading the change. Unlike generations before us, young people today are making conscious decisions to ensure that future generations do not inherit preventable challenges like we do today. But those young people, especially young women and girls, need resources, support, and most importantly, need a space to meaningfully participate in discussions that will directly impact their lives. They need a seat at the table. This is why we are excited that in less than 2 weeks, the Secretary General will launch a system-wide UN youth strategy to reset and reorient UN's work with and for young people. A major part of implementing the strategy will be to support young people's climate action, both by empowering them with the necessary tools and by encouraging them to hold their governments accountable. With that thought in mind, please let me welcome someone who knows and values the contributions of young people, takes his intergenerational responsibilities seriously, and goes the extra mile to ensure our voices are heard. Dear Secretary General, as you come up on stage, I want you to know that the future of 1.8 billion young people lies in the hands of decision makers like yourself. We hope you and your generation leaves this planet in a better condition than how you found it. We count on your leadership to protect the only planet we call home. Young people across the globe are ready to hold their governments accountable. And within the United Nations, I know you're technically my boss, but I will hold you accountable. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. António Guterres.
Dear friends of planet Earth, thank you for coming to the UN headquarters today. I have asked you here to sound the alarm. Climate change is the defining issue of our time, and we are at a defining moment. We face a direct existential threat. Climate change is moving faster than we are, and its speed has provoked a sonic boom SOS across our world. If we do not change course by 2020, we risk missing the point where we can avoid runaway climate change with disastrous consequences for people and all the natural systems that sustain us. And that is why today I'm appealing for leadership from politicians, from business and scientists, and from the public everywhere. We have the tools to make our actions effective. What we still lack, even after the Paris Agreement, is the leadership and the ambition to do what is needed. Dear friends, let there be no doubt about the urgency of the crisis. We are experiencing record-breaking temperatures around the world. According to the World Meteorological Organization, the past 2 decades, including 18 of the warmest years since 1850, when records began. And this year is shaping up to be the 4th hottest. Extreme heat waves, wildfires, storms, and floods are leaving a trail of death and devastation. Last month, the state of Kerala in India suffered its worst monsoon flooding in recent history, killing 400 people and driving 1 million more from their homes. We know that Hurricane Maria killed almost 3,000 people in Puerto Rico last year, making it one of the deadliest extreme weather disasters in US history. And many of those people died in the months after the storm because they lacked access to electricity, clean water, and proper health care due to the hurricane. And what makes all of this even more disturbing is that we were warned. Scientists have been telling us for decades, over and over again, and far too many leaders have refused to listen. And far too few have acted with the vision the science demands. And we see the results. In some situations, they are approaching scientists' worst-case scenarios. Arctic sea ice is disappearing faster than we imagined possible. And this year, for the first time, thick, permanent sea ice north of Greenland began to break up. This dramatic warming in the Arctic is affecting weather patterns across the northern hemisphere. Wildfires are lasting longer and spreading further. And some of these blazes are so big that they send soot and ash around the world, blackening glaciers and ice caps and making them melt even faster. Oceans are becoming more acidic, threatening the foundation of the food chains that sustain life. Corals are dying in vast amounts, further depleting vital fisheries. And on land, the high level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is making rice crops less nutritious, threatening well-being and food security for billions of people. As climate change intensifies, we'll find it harder to feed ourselves, and the extinction rates will spike as vital habitats decline. And more people will be forced to migrate from their homes as the land they depend on becomes less able to support them. And this is already leading to many local conflicts over dwindling resources. This past May, the World Meteorological Organization reported that the planet marked another green milestone, the highest monthly average for carbon dioxide levels ever recorded. 400 parts per million has long been seen as a critical threshold. But we have now surpassed 411 parts per million, and the concentrations continue to rise. And this is the highest concentration in 3 million years. Dear friends, we know what is happening to our planet. We know what we need to do, and we even know how to do it. But sadly, the ambition of our action is nowhere near where it needs to be. When world leaders signed the Paris Agreement on climate change 3 years ago, they pledged to stop temperatures rising by less than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and to work to keep the increase as close as possible to 1.5 degrees. These targets were really the bare minimum to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. But scientists tell us that we are far off track. According to a UN study, the commitments made so far by parties to the Paris Agreement represent just 1/3 of what is needed. The mountain in front of us is very high, but it is not unsurmountable. We know how to scale it. Put simply, we need to put the brake on deadly greenhouse gas emissions and drive climate action. We need to rapidly shift away from our dependence on fossil fuels. We need to replace them with clean energy from water, wind, and sun. We must halt deforestation, restore degraded forests, and change the way we farm. We need to embrace the circular economy and resource efficiency. Our cities and transport sectors will need to be overhauled. How we heat, cool, and light our buildings will need to be rethought so we waste less energy. And this is exactly where this conversation can become exciting. Because so much of the conversation on climate change has focused on the doom and gloom. And of course, warnings are necessary. But fear will not get the job done. No, what captures my imagination is the vast opportunity afforded by climate action. Dear friends, enormous benefits await humankind if we can rise to the climate challenge. A great many of these benefits are economic. I've heard the argument, usually from vested interests, that tackling climate change is expensive and could harm economic growth. This is hogwash. In fact, the opposite is true. We are experiencing huge economic losses due to climate change. Over the past decade, extreme weather and the health impact of burning fossil fuels have cost the American economy at least $240 billion a year. This cost will explode by 50% in the coming decade alone. By 2030, the loss of productivity caused by a hotter world could cost the global economy $2 trillion. And more studies also show the enormous benefits of climate action. Last week, I was at the launch of the new economic report from the Global Commission on the Economy and Climate Change. And the report shows that climate action and socio-economic progress are mutually supportive, with gains of $26 trillion predicted by 2030 compared with business as usual, if we pursue the right path. For example, for every dollar spent restoring degraded forests, as much as $30 can be recouped in economic benefits and poverty reduction. And restoring degraded lands means better lives and income for farmers and pastoralists and less pressure to migrate to cities. Climate-resilient water supply and sanitation could save the lives of more than 360,000 infants every year. And clean air has vast benefits for public health. The International Labour Organization reports that common-sense green economy policies could create 24 million new jobs globally by 2030. In China and the United States, new renewable energy jobs now outstrip those created in the oil and gas industries. And in Bangladesh, the installation of more than 4 million solar home systems has created more than 150,000 jobs and saved rural households over $400 million in polluting fuels. So not only would a shift to renewable energy save money, it would also create new jobs, waste less water, boost food production, and clean the polluted air that is killing us. There is nothing to lose from acting. There is everything to gain. Now, there is still many who think that the challenge is too great, but I deeply disagree. Humankind has confronted and overcome immense challenges before, challenges that have required us to work together and to put aside division and difference to fight a common threat. And that is how the United Nations came into action. It is how we have helped to end wars, to stop diseases, to reduce global poverty, and to heal the ozone hole. Now we stand at an existential crossroads. If we are to take the right path, the only sensible path, we will have to master the full force of human ingenuity. But that ingenuity exists and is already providing solutions. And so, dear friends, another central message. Technology is on our side in the battle to address climate change. The rise of renewable energy has been tremendous. And today, it is competitive, or even cheaper than coal and oil, especially when one takes into account the cost of pollution. Last year, China invested $126 billion in renewable energy, an increase of 30% on the previous year. Sweden is set to hit its 2030 target for renewable energy this year, 12 years early. By 2030, wind and solar energy could power more than a third of Europe. Morocco is building a solar farm the size of Paris that will power more than 1 million homes by 2020 with clean, affordable energy. Scotland has opened the world's first floating wind farm. And there are many other signs of hope. Countries rich in fossil fuels, like the Gulf states and Norway, are exploring ways to diversify their economies. Saudi Arabia is investing heavily in renewables to move from an oil economy to an energy economy. Norway's $1 trillion sovereign wealth fund, the largest in the world, has moved away from investments in coal and has dropped a number of palm and pulp paper companies because of the forests they destroy. And there are also promising signs that businesses are waking up to the benefits of climate action. More than 130 of the world's largest and most influential businesses plan to power their operations with 100% renewable energy. 18 multinationals will shift to electrical vehicle fleets. And more than 400 firms will develop targets based on the latest science in order to manage their emissions. One of the world's biggest insurers, Allianz, will stop insuring coal-fired power plants. Investments are shifting too. More than 250 investors representing $28 trillion in assets have signed on to the Climate Action 100+ initiative. They have committed to engage with the world's largest corporate greenhouse emitters to improve their climate performance and ensure transparent disclosure of emissions. Many such examples are going to be showcased this week at the important Global Climate Action Summit being convened by Governor Brown in California. All the pioneers I mentioned have seen the future. They are betting on green because they understand that this is the path to prosperity and peace on an healthy planet. The alternative is a dark and dangerous future. And these are all important strides, but they are not enough. The transition to a cleaner, greener future needs to speed up. We stand at a truly use it or lose it moment. Over the next decade or so, the world will invest some $90 trillion in infrastructure. And so we must ensure that that infrastructure is sustainable, or we will be locked in a high-polluting, dangerous future. And for that to happen, the leaders of the world need to step up. The private sector, of course, is poised to move, and many are doing so. But the lack of decisive government action is causing uncertainty in the markets and concern about the future of the Paris Agreement. We can't let this happen. Existing technologies are waiting to come online: cleaner fuels, alternative building materials, better batteries, and advances in farming and land use. And these and other innovations can have a major role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions so we can hit the Paris targets and inject the great ambition that is so urgently needed. But governments must also end harmful subsidies for fossil fuels, institute carbon pricing that reflects the true cost of polluting greenhouse emissions, and incentivize the clean energy transition. Dear friends, I have spoken of the emergency we face, the benefits of action, and the feasibility of a climate-friendly transformation. But there is another reason to act: moral duty. The world's richest nations are the most responsible for the climate crisis, yet the effects are being felt first and worst by the poorest nations and the most vulnerable peoples and communities. We already see this injustice in the incessant and increasing cycle of extreme droughts and ever more powerful storms. Women and girls in particular will pay the price, not only because their lives will become harder, but because in times of disaster, women and girls always suffer disproportionately. Richer nations must therefore not only cut their emissions, but do more to ensure that the most vulnerable can develop the necessary resilience to survive the damage these emissions are causing. It is important to note that because carbon dioxide is long-lasting in the atmosphere, the climate changes we are already seeing will persist for decades to come. And it's necessary for all nations to adapt and for the richest ones to assist the most vulnerable. Dear friends, this is the message I would like to make clear in addressing the world leaders this month in the General Assembly in New York. I want to tell them that climate change is the great challenge of our time, that thanks to science we know its size and nature, that we have the ingenuity and the resources and tools to face it, and that leaders must lead. We have the moral and economic incentives to act. What is still missing, still even after Paris, is the leadership and the sense of urgency and true commitment to a decisive multilateral response. Negotiations towards implementation guidelines for operationalizing the Paris Agreement ended yesterday in Bangkok with some progress, but far from enough. The next key moment is in Poland in December. I call on leaders to use every opportunity between now and then, the G7, the G20 gatherings, as well as meetings of the General Assembly, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, to resolve the sticking points. We cannot allow Katowice to remind us of Copenhagen. The time has come for our leaders to show they care about the people whose fate they hold in their hands, and we need them to show they care about the future and even the present. And that is why I'm so pleased to have such a strong representation of youth in the audience today. It is imperative that civil society, youth, human groups, the private sector, communities of faith, scientists, and grassroots movements around the world call their leaders to account, as I was called myself by my youth envoy. And I call in particular on women's leadership. When women are empowered to lead, they are the drivers of solutions. Nothing less than our future and the fate of humankind depends on how we rise to the climate challenge. It affects every aspect of the work of the United Nations. Keeping our planet's warming to well below 2 degrees is essential for global prosperity, people's well-being, and the security of nations. And that is why next September I will convene a climate summit to bring climate action to the top of the international agenda. Today, I'm announcing the appointment of Luis Alfonso de Alba, a well-respected leader in the climate community, as my special envoy to lead those preparations. And these efforts will, of course, complement those of my special envoy for climate action, Michael Bloomberg, and my special advisor, Bob Orr, who will help to mobilize private finance and catalyze bottom-up action. The summit next year will come exactly 1 year before countries will have to enhance their national climate pledges under the Paris Agreement. And only a significantly higher level of ambition will do. To that end, the summit will focus on areas that go to the heart of the problem, the sectors that create the most emissions, and the areas where building resilience will make the biggest difference. And the summit will provide an opportunity for leaders and partners to demonstrate real climate action and showcase their ambition. We will bring together players from the real economy and real politics, including representatives of trillions of dollars of assets, both public and private. And I want to hear about how we are going to stop the increase in emissions by 2020 and dramatically reduce emissions to reach net zero emissions by mid-century. We need cities and states to shift from coal to solar and wind, from brown to green energy. Our great host city, New York, is taking important steps in this direction and working with the other municipalities to spur change. We need increased investments and innovation in energy efficiency and renewable energy technologies across buildings, transport, and industry. And we need the oil and gas industry to make their business plans compatible with the Paris Agreement and the Paris targets. I want to see a strong expansion in carbon pricing. And I want us to get the global food system right by ensuring that we grow our food without chopping down large tracts of forest. We need sustainable food supply chains that reduce loss and waste. And we must alter deforestation and restore degraded lands. And I want to rapidly speed up the trend towards green financing by banks and insurers and encourage innovation in financial and debt instruments to strengthen the resilience of vulnerable nations, such as small island states, and bolster their defenses against climate change. And I want to see governments fulfilling their pledge to mobilize $100 billion a year for climate action in support of the developing world. And we need to see the Green Climate Fund become fully operational and fully resourced. But for all these, we need governments, industry and civil society reading from the same page, with governments front and center driving the movement for climate action. I'm calling on all leaders to come to next year's climate summit prepared to report not only on what they are doing, but what more they intend to do when they convene in 2020 for the UN Climate Conference, and where commitments will be renewed and I'm surely ambitiously increased. And it is why I'm calling on civil society and young people in particular to campaign for climate action. Let us use the next year for transformational decisions in boardrooms, executive suites, and parliaments across the world. Let us raise our sights, build coalitions, and make our leaders listen. And I commit myself and the entire United Nations to this effort. We will support all leaders who will rise to the challenge I have outlined today. Dear friends, there is no more time to waste. As the ferocity of this summer's wildfires and heat waves shows, the world is changing before our eyes. We are careering towards the edge of the abyss. It is not too late to shift course, but every day that passes means the world eats up a little more and the cost of our inaction mounts. Every day we fail to act is a day that we step a little closer towards a fate that none of us want, a fate that will resonate through generations in the damage done to humankind and life on Earth. Our fate is in our hands. The world is counting on all of us to rise to the challenge before it is too late. I count on you all. Thank you.
Thank you, SG. We look forward to taking your message loud and clear all over the world, and the alarm you sounded is definitely worth keep not in the back of our mind, but in the front of our mind as we prepare for the 73rd session of the General Assembly. Thank you, everyone, for your time and for attending this important event.